All right. Hi, I'm Sean Longdo. I'm the CEO of Outforce.AI, and we are a company that helps companies navigate the mess of outsourcing by preventing you from having conversations with companies you shouldn't have conversations with, and guiding you to better matching agencies based on what you're really looking for. And today is the first of our podcast series on growing pains. And we have a fantastic guest today, Jane Creed from PennyAI. And Jane has been through many cycles, 20 years of experience in technology, and has worked on both sides of the equation, from a service provider as well as from a client, and both and large and small companies. Something just happened to my computer. So from large and small companies, including banks and insurance companies in Ireland, and then with a large service provider, CSC, in Southeast Asia, where she worked in Singapore, moved back to Vancouver, and then off to Auckland, New Zealand, and then with DXC. And most recently, about 2.5 years ago, she joined a small company in Vancouver, Canada, called PennyAI. And PennyAI happens to be a client of ours, so we've been through actually 2 cycles with PennyAI. And have a mixed bag of stories to tell from that, as it was early stage for us as well. And really, Jane is going to help anyone out there who is considering outsourcing understand when you should and should not outsource, at what stage in your life cycle you're at, and really what matching criteria to look for so that you're better served with your outcomes, and what your readiness should be internally for those external resources. And PennyAI, from my knowledge of it, is from its early days, is really a great company that helps it's built a CRM really initially for the multi-level marketing vendors. In the first instance, it was for the founder's wife, who was using a spreadsheet or some other form. And her husband, David, is the founder of the company, said, "That's nuts. You've got to have a better tool." So he built a very intuitive and friendly user-face system for anyone who has no technology experience but wants to increase sales. And it gives appropriate nudges and information when you need it, and has grown substantially. You can imagine when a company like Avon or somebody gets it, they have tens of thousands of users. So what's amazing is how much the company increases its sales just from the first month of use using PennyAI. So Jane, I hope that's an appropriate introduction.
Yeah, no, it's great, Sean. Thanks for inviting me along today. Yeah, I've been around for a while. So I've quite a diverse experience, as you said, kind of around the globe. I'm really excited. As you said, a couple of years ago, started at PennyAI, a startup based out of Squamish. And I guess our mission is kind of creating the world's most authentic buying experience between influencers, their followers, brands, sellers of all kinds. But what does that really kind of mean for us on a day-to-day basis? We're kind of looking at the sellers and how we can support them and drive their day-to-day. Through our Penny, your AI assistant, and supporting you in reach outs and managing prospects and following up on orders, etc. And then at the enterprise level, understanding their market, what's selling, what's not, how is Penny supporting, what works, what kind of reach out works. So coming back with data to help drive both the sellers and the companies with the relevant information to help them make decisions. Obviously, in today's world, there's a lot going on globally. There's big shifts, there's big changes. Looking at how we can diversify and how we can support that mission that we have, and kind of help I guess, deliver that authentic buying experience globally. It is changing times and trying to work alongside those.
Okay. So let's talk a bit about the challenges of those kinds of differences in growth, from a guy who's helping his wife to a massive enterprise with thousands and thousands of sellers. what were some of the engineering challenges you faced in that difference in customer base, and what did you have to do to respond to that?
Yeah, so I guess a couple of key things here, like looking at our core product and building out the core features that are to support those sellers in the field, right? And that's going to be the same whether it's one or, Terry, like David's wife, or it's going to be, a million sellers in the marketplace. They're the core features that are helping people in the day-to-day. Then you want to look at the features that are needed to support the leaders of the sellers, and how are they supporting their team, and how are they managing their team, and how can they get the analytics they need to make their team successful, and understand where there's training or there's growth or what content they need. And then there's the enterprises themselves, these large organizations that are looking corporately to support that field, but also need additional information themselves and understanding. So as it's kind of expanded over the years, it's kind of looked at all of those different personas and looked at the features that need to be built to support them, and continually to evolve using insight from the field, from our corporate partners, etc. How do you do that with a small team, right? So this started with kind of like 3 people in a room, then it became 5 people in a room, then it became 100 people in a room. And I joined at around 50. And it was a really telling point in the organization, because you now have too many people to be able to understand and be part of every conversation. So how do you set yourself up that you can keep that original knowledge sharing of the core intent, the expectations, and ensure that's what we're building to? So it was a really exciting time to join. I'd had a lot of experience kind of with operational transition in much larger organizations. I worked for Fortune 500. The last kind of operational transition I'd worked on within engineering and product engineering was like 1,000 people, right? Mm-hmm. So this was a different scale, but again, regardless of the scale, the same principles need to be followed. The same customer-centric thinking needs to be driving all of the conversation. So we came up with, our roadmap and our features, and then we look at our team and we say, oh, we don't have the capacity, right? So that's what gets you starting that conversation of what do we outsource? When do we outsource? Do we want to augment the team short-term, long-term? What does that look like? Are these long-term skills we need? So we started to think about some of the core features that we were trying to build that were maybe secondary priority, maybe not as time critical as others. And we looked, that was our first kind of reach out with you and Outforce, Sean. And we looked, and we getting a team and bringing a team on board to support that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to take a step back to that. So you grew organically. I mean, and I've been through these cycles myself, where you rely on your engineering team to hire more engineers through their network, and then maybe you hire a few recruiters, but you definitely want your team in the house. You want to manage the culture, you want to manage the work ethics, you want to have, and now not so much, but you certainly want to have some interaction and personal engagement with people face to face. So what changed? That was it you, or was it someone in the organization who said, okay, we will outsource something, and how did you parse that out?
Yeah, so this conversation had started just before I joined. So, I think the driving force for this was we wanted to deliver our roadmap faster than our capacity could. Okay. So a quick win was to outsource it. Right. On reflection, because I think we can, that was not necessarily the most successful outsourcing experience for us, right? Were we ready to outsource? I don't think we had enough of an understanding of what we were building and the core architecture that was going to be around it to pass it on. Did we have the right oversight in place to support the team that onboarded? Probably not. So I think really when you start to look at outsourcing teams, you kind of have to step back and ask yourself, what is it that you're trying to do to progress your roadmap? Is it to get features in earlier? Is it to, how do you want to augment it? And think, is it just key skills you're missing? If it is a key feature that you want built in parallel and you're thinking about a dedicated team to build it, make sure that you as an organization have a really strong vision of what that is, what you want it, the expectations you have of it. Is it refined enough? Has your product solution team and core designers had their input into what they perceive that should look like? And then what oversight do you want to have on that? And we were probably a little naive in our interaction with that, and we kind of handed it off and didn't get what we expected. We had minimal oversight. Another possible kind of in reflecting on this before the conversation here today, I think we had one point of contact into the team. So we were relying, rather than knowing and engaging with all of the team, we were relying on a single point of contact.
When you say a single point of contact, that was your single point of contact with the other side, or was that
so the other team had
okay,
like a kind of a scrum master product owner that was driving the work into the team.
right?
So the rest of the team weren't really kind of engaged with us, both culturally and architecturally, understanding our thinking and our ways of working.
Gotcha.
So there was a delivery. The onboarding or the offboarding, I should say, was probably problematic because it didn't meet our expectations. And there was a lot of good lessons learned, right?
Right.
And the second time we came back, right? So this again is down to Penny's growth, right? Dealing with large organizations, we have core Penny and core Penny features where we see that they're just driving the field in their daily sales activity, are the leaders to support those sales activity, and then analytics for the enterprise. But then we have enterprise clients who also want to maybe build custom features for themselves. So very unique to them, not really having any core value across the board. And we were starting to get these asks, and that was taking capacity out of our core team and not allowing us to have a quick enough turnaround on the feedback that we were getting from our users, because we were consuming our capacity to build custom features. And that's when we reconsidered coming back to an outsourcing model. Really clear long-term goal in mind that an outsourced team would be dedicated, would have back-end, front-end skills, product ownership, and Scrum Master, so manage themselves. That was our long-term goal, but we looked and stepped into how we were going to get there. So when we reached out the second time, really positive experience with you, I think, Sean. And let's start with, how did we pick a team to outsource with, right?
Right.
I think, first of all, we knew what we wanted long-term. And the interview process you set up with organizations, right? We met on calls with their management and the teams, and allowed a really open, transparent process that allowed us to find our culture fit. So that was really important, because I think for us, finding a culture fit was important. And then we were able to meet with the engineers. We were able to talk with the engineers, see their skill set, understand that was a good skills match for us.
Right. How was that little pitch in here?
Yeah.
For Outforce? We generally, from our large data set, narrow it down to about 20 companies that on paper would make sense based on the engineering teams that are available. And then we let the company, in this case, Penny, choose their top 5 to interview. And then the interview is set up so they're meeting the engineering team, not the management, because they really want to know who they're interviewing with. And and all that cycles down to about a 2-3 week period, and then the week of interviewing. And so what did you discover in that interviewing process that you didn't think you would know? from
Well,
all
first of
your
all, I
experience
think,
working around the
no,
world,
first of
right?
all, I think a curated list was incredible, right? Because I'm sure anybody listening to this gets, I don't know how many blind calls into LinkedIn inbox, their everything, my phone, constant, are you hiring? We've got the team for you. There's just so much noise out there. And I certainly don't have the capacity to be reading through, processing all of that. So for your team and Outforce to take that and to curate it into a list, and we interviewed, I think, 4 or 5 only in the end, because we quickly found a match, right?
Yeah.
So in these conversations, I think it was the second or third organization we met with, really good match culturally. We really liked the skills that they were going to be able to provide, and the time zone. That was another thing that we had a bit of lessons learned from the first time. I've worked globally. I've lived in Vancouver and worked with people in India, Australia, the UK. It requires a lot of management and willingness to shift a little outside of the 9 to 5. And as a very much West Coast based company, we have teams elsewhere and we have global representation. We found it very difficult to have the team and connect with the team as often as we wanted to when they were based in Europe. So we went with anything in the Americas, all the way down, right? It gave us a nice window of time zones. So we quickly in that process found our cultural skills and time zone match. So, and we went ahead. And then it was a matter of them providing resumes, us validating the skills. We had decided that the steps we were going to take for that long-term goal of a dedicated team was to, in fact, initially integrate the resources into our existing teams.
That was different from your first one. So your first one, you described it as they were throw it over the fence, get this stuff done, and hopefully it turns out well.
Exactly.
This time you're actually taking almost like a staff augmentation model, where you're plugging them into existing pods.
We wanted a long-term relationship. This wasn't just bring in some quick skills. So that long-term relationship meant we want people to have an understanding of our core architecture, our core needs, our business, like who are the personas that we were actually, building for. And that set that team up. They're now dedicated. They're now independent. They do all the the non-core work, all the custom work. They have their own product owner, scrum master, back-end, front-end engineers, QA, because taking that 3 to 6 month period and working on some big projects together, they got a really good understanding. And they are now the experts in some of those custom areas. But all of the solutioning that's done for that custom code doesn't lose sight of our core. Everything goes through our core solutions team. So looking at it from a product perspective, how would we want to meet this need, even though it's custom, with our core in mind? Maybe there's an opportunity here to build a new core feature and then configure it for this custom need. Or architect it in a way that allows it to be reused as functionality for another core feature, even though it is custom. So we keep a very clear ownership on that to ensure reusability. I worked in insurance software for years, and some really great products that were out, in the, I'm not going to say now, but like decades ago. And what I found was that we would have this great product and we would implement it, and we were implementing globally. And then there's the customization that's happening. A really good example of that would be when I was was based out in Southeast Asia. Like whether it was in Taiwan or Indonesia or Malaysia, Singapore, they all have different governing regulations, right? But the core insurance transaction is the same. The core value stream is the same, but they might have, international ownership that might have its own needs, right? Instead of taking the core and leaving it and building and augmenting on, what a lot was happening is that customizations were happening. And then reducing your ability to take and to avail of new core features. So for me, keeping
Sorry, you mean it slowed the services down, or
it prevented them from, like, say, as a product organization, we were building new functionality. If you had deviated so far from the core, you could no longer take advantage of that new functionality.
Okay,
So as a
gotcha.
SaaS provider, it's very important to us that everything is compatible, that we build forward, right? That our SaaS solution has a core that gets built on, is backward compatible. If we allow you to build custom, that we ensure that we don't break your ability to consume core, right?
Right. Okay.
So that really is a driving part of it. So outsourcing a piece of work without them having that understanding could lead you to building blocks of code,
right,
that would kind of break that model.
Gotcha.
So that worked really well. The team were very successful. They're up and running. They're doing great. We have a excellent relationship with management as well as at the team level. And I think that's really important. And I think that's something that Outforce brings. So we meet, twice a month, management at Outforce, management at the organization, and myself and our team. And we chat about what's working and what's not. And everybody's teams are talking to their management. And this is an opportunity for us to be really transparent, right? Because the team member might not be quite willing to say, that product owner is not really communicating well, or I'm not really getting the clarity I need, or I actually am missing a skill to deliver the ask. And we're very transparent about our concerns. The management on your side is really good at sharing back as well. And we've resolved issues. We've had people who didn't have the skills to do the job. They don't stay very long, right? Because it's a small company, it's a small organization. We can't hide people who can't do the job, right? And that's a big advantage of being outsourced, right? Is that you have that opportunity to quickly resolve where the skills aren't performing as expected.
Right, exactly right. So you start off with, say, a pod of 7 or 5 to 7, and then one might have been technically very good, but in the interview process, they kind of hid behind the rest of the team, and it becomes clear in the stand-ups that that person's not the right kind of communicator, maybe doesn't take criticism of the code very well, or anything like that. And you need to replace the one, but you don't want to change the whole team, right?
No, absolutely not. It would always be on individual basis. And I think we've had great opportunities for growth, right? So it's not, if one thing goes wrong, you're done, right? It's what went wrong? How do we fix it? So working with the outsourced team, like they're one of our own, and looking to inspect and adapt and evolve through the process.
Now let's go back to what didn't work, because in the first go around, it was early in our model as well. But we had the company that you had selected, actually we had seen used before by other clients and had great success. What happened, as you described, maybe there wasn't good enough communications and you weren't set up for success internally in order to bring an external team in, and there were higher expectations of that external team, which I also had, based on our previous experience. But as you say, it depends on how you work together. The offboarding, in my opinion, was not a good experience for anybody. And so the lesson that I got out of that was having a very clear, just as you do on onboarding an employee, you have a very clear sequence and motions in place. And sometimes when you let people go as employees, you have clear and important sequences to do. But in outsourcing, a lot of people don't have necessarily a good onboarding process, and even more important, a good offboarding process. Onboarding, you can sort of trip your way through it, but offboarding, you need to have certain things. What would you suggest to anyone about offboarding, and what you might be looking out for in that offboarding process?
Yeah, I think it has to start sooner rather than later. I think if the delivery had been successful, the offboarding process might not have been so bad. I think it was the expectations not being met, and thinking we had communicated acceptance criteria, but not seeing any deliverable for that, and not catching that. So to me, the lesson we've learned, and the most important thing, is quick and early feedback. So if you've set somebody something to do, we're working in sprints. So everybody presents at the sprint demo. So it doesn't matter if it's an outsourced team or an integrated member of our existing teams. When they first onboard it, they're presenting and sharing. So we can see very early on and go, that's not what we wanted. That's the product team can see that wasn't their expectations weren't being met. And I think that I would recommend that anybody, whether you're looking at a team, looking at bringing that quick feedback is really, really important, because I think it's process that fails us, never usually individuals, right? And trying to figure out then, very few programmers out there write bad code, is what I always say. Like, I said, there's very few people writing bad code, right?
I would disagree. I've seen that too.
Well, very few people who work for me are writing bad code.
Exactly. Yeah.
And what happens is that the code doesn't meet the expectations and the need because it wasn't clear, it wasn't understood, right? And and bad code can be corrected through learning, right? Like, this is a better way, this is a simpler way to meet that complex problem, or and people can be open to that. And obviously, you're investing in your own team, you're doing that kind of education and mentoring and support. With the outsourcing team, what I found is that both your management and the organization's management, Sean, are really good at following up on technical skills and expertise, and making sure that, do we need to mentor anybody? Do we need to support anybody? What can we be doing to make sure that and we have not had, with this particular group, we have not had anybody, or there's no one on the team today who doesn't have the skills to do their job. They're evolving. But we've had some really good conversations about where there were gaps, and if we were going to hire again, what we would need, and how can the organization support us in mentoring that resource in the meantime. And to the point where they've, it's okay, we figure their onboarding is going to take longer. Here's a week or two that we won't charge, right? Because it is a longer onboarding. And they've stepped up. So it's working together and having that communication really open is key. So you can solve the problems before they become issues.
And that's something that I find a lot of our clients miss when they ask at the initial interviews with our clients. I find they're looking for price, and we don't solve for price. We solve for quality and speed of getting the right people, or the right company that has the right people. And where people go, they look at domain expertise. First of all, they look at domain expertise. Does anyone know my business? Because that's a third of the onboarding process. Then they look for technical expertise, and those two should really be table stakes. The third and probably the least understood is really cultural gap, right? You've dealt with companies in India and Southeast Asia and in Eastern Europe, and as have we. And they all have very different styles of understanding what complete means, B, what good means, and what a full stack means. Like there's some that are very linear thinkers, and some that are very holistic, some that are very waterfall, and some that are very agile. And that's culturally driven as much as anything else.
And I think the culture match is huge. And I think those initial interviews we had to find the culture match, for us, agility is key. And the team's ability to commit to their objectives rather than being told their deadlines, their scope, and not having anything under their control is not something that's going to lead to success. So
can you unpack that a bit?
So for me, I think it's really important that a team, whether they're outsourced or not, that they have some say in the commitment of what they're delivering, that the ability to be successful. So we've got a piece of work right now with the dedicated team that's working for us outsourced, right? there's a key piece of work, right? Our solution architects, our product people, we've sized it. We have an idea of how long it's going to be. It's going to take, how much effort it's going to take. But my confidence is only reassured when the team itself has looked at that work, looked at their stories, thought about it, and come back and said, we can commit to it.
Okay.
And so they have a voice, as opposed to, here's the work, here's the estimate, and go and make it happen.
Right.
Because they might see a complexity that hasn't been identified. And I want to be transparent with our client if there's going to be a complexity, so that it ripples, right?
Right.
If I've pushed you into a corner to deliver something has to give. And usually it's the quality, because something will be delivered to hit the button and tick the box, right?
Yeah.
So I don't believe in moving, things along the runway if they're not actually progressing and they haven't met a solid definition of done. Right.
Yeah. Quality or scope.
Something's gotta go.
Something's gotta go.
Yeah.
So has there been any instances where there's been a big delta between what your architects and group has said versus what the vendor has said?
No, sometimes it's been, we got that done much faster because head down, got it done. And what we thought was 2 weeks work is 4 days, right? And then there's been delved in. This is actually really complex because we didn't realize that the code underneath it all is actually complex. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of onboarding here to understand it. So what we thought might be 2 days is in fact 5. So it's, but never, the plus or minus 20% is what I would expect throughout, right?
Right. And now at that level, you're really talking about the sprints and the pulls, right? Yeah. What about on a larger scale, the actual build out of a product and understanding that?
We had a big project we did with outsourced teams, and it was very tight, very committed deadline. The deadline couldn't shift. Key day, no one wasn't going to move. This day in July, it was going to happen. And we just had really good communication back from the team. What was broken, what was going to cause them to fail, what obstacles were in their way that we could remove in order for that to be successful. So we were all invested in the success, not in them saying, okay, we'll make it happen, and going in a room and digging themselves a hole that they were never going to get out of, right?
Right.
And then if you hear about delays, concerns, risks early, you can communicate them out to your clients or to your like if it's for your roadmap, you can, roadmaps are roadmaps, they're forecasts. Nobody should be expecting them to be set in stone, right?
Right.
You do, but like
you get hot, you get icy conditions, you get foggy conditions, you go off the road a little bit, right?
Yeah. And what's really nice is that the sooner you can reflect that feedback from these teams, whether they're internal or external, into that roadmap, the better and easier the messaging is, right?
Right. The last thing you want is a yes team.
Yes. I've worked with lots of yes teams. And that's a cultural shift, right?
Yeah.
And just people feeling comfortable that they can say no, and that there's a space to take risk so they can build a smarter solution, not the easy solution. That's key. And I think within your organization, you have to have that healthy setup if you want others to work like that. If your own environment is already working in a way that you tell your teams what they're to do, you tell your teams when they're to have it done, and you expect it to happen, then you're going to get the same results with your outsourced team in the same way. So that cultural fit will really make a difference.
Okay. So let's talk about different stages of companies, because not everyone's the same size.
Yes.
So there's life cycle and stage of a company. I've seen this many times where you have a bootstrap company. You're building your first product, almost a POC. Well, let's call it a POC, and then you've got a couple of customers. You start writing code for the next new customer, another layer of code, layer, and then you have to finally refactor, because your ticket list of problems is bigger than your sprint. So So talk to me about how that works for you, and what you've seen work well and what hasn't worked well, or anything around that and it may or may not relate to outsourcing, but
No, but it does actually, because like if
yeah,
you look at the first 5 people that go in the room, they're probably not all employees, right?
right.
Some of those people are skills that you've brought to the table, right?
Mm.
So you bring people in who have the skill to get this piece built, and they might go, or they might eventually become an employee. But as a a scrappy startup, you don't have necessarily the ability to onboard people. So you're contracting, you're outsourcing people and to support that really scrappy stage.
Mm.
I think that as it rolls out, like there's always a space for thinking about what size is the correct size for the organization. Like, how do we not grow too quickly so that we can take those kind of ebbs and flows that are going to come in any organization, and we can contract as needed, right? And looking to see what then, like, because in 10 years time, that might not be an outsourced, that could be we just have a separate division, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Because
mm-hmm.
we want to be core product focused, but we could have a division that was supported. But at this point in Penny's trajectory, we want to be very focused on our core, and we want to ensure that anything we're building custom is aligned with our core. So we don't want to just farm it out. We want to have solution and architectural ownership, but we don't necessarily need the skills employed, because that is something that might be the first thing to go when things start to get tight and purse strings start to get tight with our clients, right?
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
well, we won't build anything custom. We'll just go with the core features and we'll see how they work for us, right?
Right.
So I think I don't know if I've necessarily answered your question, but
Well, I'll re-ask, because you touched on it, but I'm curious. Most companies that I know in North America, and certainly the ones I've started, we built our first engineering team from day one. Like I'm a business side of this of the equation. I would always hire a real technical partner, a CTO, and that person would build a team, and we build the product, and we go to market. I'm seeing a lot more of company, second time CEOs saying, don't know if I need to give up that much equity to my founding CTO, because that might get replaced as I find out that it's a good friend and doesn't have the right skills for the growth. So I'll outsource a POC and then build the team once I get product market fit. Are you seeing? I mean, what do you see?
I think it depends on a lot, right? It's the who's particularly, and then what, right? If you've, and if what and want, like if you can be really, really clear about your intent, and like, to me, driving what is it that you architecturally need to support? Because if you can't have those conversations with something you've outsourced this to, like, we expect to be able to support 1 million users in 6 months, or we're only looking for 100. It's a very different architectural structure. Right. We expect to be able to, this is our 3 core features. But where are we going after that? What's the long-term vision? Because how we build the 3 core features, you want to be careful you don't do it too much, but you want to preserve some variability, right? To change and to pivot without incurring overhead and costs and building complex code for variability that might never be needed. So I think it's a need that really is unique to the situation of the who, the what, and the when, right?
Right.
Because if your POC has to make a conference, has to make a pitch at something, and you need it in a short period of time, then you're going to bring in skills, right?
Right.
And we've done it too. Like, you bring in the right skills to move you forward in that moment, right?
Right. Outsource for speed.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you have to know what you want if it's going to be successful.
That's exactly right. And know how to get it.
Yeah. How to articulate. Yeah. Because I think we're all great at talking about what we want, but how well have you communicated that, right? Was it really like, have you put some feedback loops in place to make sure that what you asked was actually understood, and now you're hearing it back?
Very good. Very good. Okay. And so in refactoring, let's go from, we've gone from take a company life cycle, POC, product market fit. Now you build your engineering team, or you did from the beginning, whatever the case may be. And now you've had these new customers, and two of them are enterprise. And like you, similar to Penny, you know, you build these front ends to match up with them and new APIs. Now you've got layers of code on top. And let's say it was built on, I don't want to downplay any one particular framework, but let's say it's Ruby on Rails. We know that doesn't scale like others, and you have to refactor. So what are the decisions you make there? And
I think to understand the timing of refactoring, you need strong engineering leadership in there, because that's not going to come from outsourced teams. If you're not vested in it, I mean, I say that, and I spent a lot of my career in consulting roles, and I always felt vested. It depends on the individual, right? So I have to be, but you're not getting that necessarily. And I think you need to be in a position to be making the decisions. It's time to refactor because this is our next step, as opposed to we need to refactor because we're failing. So Ruby on Rails, like, we're failing, now it's too late, right? So having that architectural insight and understanding early, and that doesn't mean you have to have the skills. It means that you have to have the ability to listen to the people who do have the skills, who can look at your code, who can tell you where the risks are, and who can assess the timeline for criticality of that. Like for us, ease of integration, configuring, and getting is key for speedy implementations and successful integrations with any enterprise, right? So we have to be focused on that. That has to be a core part of our architectural runway. Whether we bring in outsourced resources to work on that, or whether we bring in a senior architect to advise on that, they're both viable options, right? We had the architectural skills in-house.
You surely did.
But we brought in potentially some skills to help build it, right?
Gotcha. Yeah. So I've seen that movie many times, where the original CTO was great at firefighting and building scrappy product, and could build fast and get it done, and build a team around that. And then the customer base outgrew the system, and they had to have, and you've seen that in a couple of Canadian companies you probably know about, where they have major enterprise customers, but they now need to rebuild the core because everything was bespoke application, and they need to scale that way.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, it's not because I joined, but like there was a point at which, like at around that kind of 50 employees, 60 employees, and where it just becomes the ability to communicate isn't there, and to be agile and to adapt at scale, right? Isn't there. And you need to bring some principles to the table that allow the vision to be shared. And I think it applies whether it's an internal team or an external team working on it. Right? That you have to be open, right? And find your skill gaps. And I know we've talked a bit about this too, like, is there an area where we need a specific skill? Do we go out and look, instead of hiring some big shot, that we just come and look for some skills, for some insight, some consulting for a couple of months? So that's another kind of outsource option that I'm always open to, right? If the need comes. Yeah,
and that's kind of where we've had customers who've done the cycle, and they really need to support their current customer base, so they can't take the legacy team off of the current application. They have to rebuild in parallel and then slowly reconnect. And in those cases, we brought in senior architects who just advised on how to do that, because they do it all the time. And then a more highly efficient workforce that could do the grunt, I don't want to say grunt, but the heavy lift to build the product and re-engineer from the bottom up.
And I'm not at Penny, but I was involved in some significant SaaS products in my previous roles, and like there was one SaaS solution that it just kept getting rebuilt and never actually getting value. So we had to curtail the architects and say, stop re-architecting. We actually just need to launch some value. So there's a balance here. Like that was, I would say, 12 months to 18 months struggling to get value out the door because of the constant re-architecting. So there's a real balance there between the value in getting a product that's consumable out the door and the need to refactor. So I always like to think that you balance both. And
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. I'm seeing a customer right now where they're on a fairly, it's a PHP layered in, and they don't have the funds to do a full rebuild for scale, but they want to scale. So it's more important, I think, just to get what they have built for a few extra customers until they get funding to get to the scalability, and then have that as programmed roadmap technical change in the future, and do it with whatever resources they want. But I totally
and that's
agree
where
with
you can choose where your skill gaps are, right?
Yeah.
And I think knowing where your skill gaps is really important. Like if I was to kind of summarize, like for me, if I was to kind of summarize kind of that things to find your match for outsourcing, we talked about the culture, the skills is huge, knowing the skills you need. And then your just other local time zone kind of considerations will be my top three.
Okay. Well, listen, I mean, this has been fantastic. Is there anything that I haven't asked that I should have asked? Like, what was it like with the big teams? We didn't talk about that, and when you were engaging big teams.
It's interesting, like, working across 1,000 versus working across 50. The same principles apply. It's just a lot. Why I ended up at Penny and why I came to a startup is I wanted to be with everybody who was an owner, who was engaged, who was bringing, lots of smart people in the room who were bringing ideas to the table and wanted to be part of the conversation. And that's what you get at a startup. So when you go to pivot, it's really easy pivoting. There's an agility to it, right? Whereas with that larger, there's a lot of energy to make that pivot happen. And then there's maybe 10 people driving it. And then there's 990 people, which are lead weight, making it turn with the speed of the Titanic or something into that iceberg.
Right.
No, and it's just different, right? But really rewarding when you're successful, right? When you can make that kind of a change and people to see the day-to-day value of exposing and understanding why they're doing things. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And you talked about, so let's go back to feature and back to core.
Yeah.
One of the things you've talked about is this idea that everything has to be able to play back into the core and then be able to be integrated back to the core. Where have you seen the highest value in that in your experience? And where have you seen it? Has it ever not worked in that regard? Has it made the core clunky as a result?
It can make it clunky. And I know that's what happened. Like when I was out in Southeast Asia, I played played a role in product management out there. And we were actively bringing everything back into a core in our life, general, and health insurance products, right? And we were meeting regularly. We were ensuring all the great ideas were coming out and they were getting built back into core. And it built this really just feature-rich solution that you could then be rolling out again and again and again. But it became an overhead that caused delays in getting that quick turnaround. So we want our feature, we want it now, we don't care about your core. And the weight of that sale and the value of that quick implementation started to take over, and people weren't willing to wait the outcome. So I think it was a shame, and it did. Like they diversified. There's 15 different versions. There's no core.
Wow.
It was very difficult for it to come back. It's now shifting, because now with SaaS solutions, if you don't have a core, you're broken, right? Like,
Right.
yeah,
Interesting. Okay.
like you have to be product driven,
Right.
and understanding. And I think then getting clarity of needs to understand how to meet those in your core, and saying sometimes that need shouldn't be met in our core. It's not part of our business value stream. It's not part of what our product is providing, right? Knowing your boundaries, I think, is quite important as well.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, this has been fantastic. I appreciate it, Jane. Very insightful, lots of experience, lots of variety of experiences, lots of lessons learned and shared. And I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Super to chat, Sean. Great.
All right.
Talk to
Take
you
care.
again soon.
You
Ciao.
bet.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.